Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we will be talking about state management. Well, state management means preserving the state of a certain control, a web page, an object, certain data, or a user. So in other words, sometimes you would like to store some data and move this data from one page to another, or at some other cases you might want to retrieve the data within the same page. So what we need to know first is that the protocol we use in internet communication is HTTP protocol, and this protocol is a stateless protocol. What does this mean? This means that whenever a client sends a request to the server will send the response back, and that's it. So if a client sends multiple requests to a given server, then there is no way for the server to know that it's from the same client. The server does not remember anything about a client. All it does is replies to a certain request and forgets everything else. So this means that if in a certain form, for example, if you send a request to the server, when the response comes back, then if you have something on that page, everything will be lost. So if you would like to store some information on one web page, or even if you like to transfer information from one page to another, then you need state management. So we have two sides of state management, let's say. So we have state management objects that are stored on the client side, and we have others that are stored on the server side. So today we will start with one of the client side state management objects, and that is the ViewState. In order to explain how can we use the ViewState, of course, one of the things that can be done with the ViewState, so all I did with our previous application is I added a login page. So what you need to do is to add another web form. Remember, we right click on the project and select add and web form. So you add a web form. This web form is a simple login web form, so I'll show you the design. It has only two labels, two text boxes, a button, and another label for the error in case there is any. So what we are going to do today is we will simply validate the credentials of a certain user, and we need also to check for incorrect login attempts. So one of the ways to do so is counting the number of times the user entered a wrong username and a password. So let's say if the user enters wrong username and password 3 times, then we will lock his account, and we will simply display a message to tell him that the account has been locked and that they should maybe contact the administrator. Alright, so once you're done with design, we can continue with coding. So let's go to the coding. This is our login button. What we need to do first, we need to go to the page load event. In this page load event, we have to do one thing. We have to create this ViewState object that will store a certain counter. This counter that will be incremented whenever the user enters wrong credentials. So what we can do is the following. We can say if not page dot is post back. What does this mean? This means that a post back is whenever you send something to the server and the server sends a response back. So if not is post back means the first time you load the page before even sending any request to the server and getting a response back. And this is good for us because whenever the page loads, then the user hasn't yet entered the credentials. So at that point of time, we need to set our counter. So we need to store a certain counter, and a good place to do so is a ViewState object. So to create a ViewState object, all you need to do is to call the ViewState, and then you give a key. So let's say login CTR, and you set its value to 0. So this is our counter, and we are storing this counter in a ViewState object. So that's all we want to do in the page load event, and this is done only one time when you first open the page before sending any username and password to the server. Okay, so let's move to the login button. Now what we need to do is the following. Number one, we have to validate the credentials. Number two, we have to check if these are correct credentials. If they are valid, if the user is authenticated, then we will maybe direct the user to a different page. Otherwise, here is our job today. So if the user enters a wrong username and a password, or a password, we would like to do something. So let's think of what needs to be done if the user enters a wrong username or a password. Let's say in ideal situations we have credentials stored in a database, so we need to validate against a user table. For the time being, let's say we have predefined username and a password. So let's say we have admin. Okay, so what we can do is the following. We can say if, remember we have the username txt.text does not equal, so this is our username, or so if one of those is not correct, password txt.text is not admin. Okay, so else will be the user entered valid credentials, so authenticated, maybe a redirect to a different page, or maybe to the home page. Okay, so here in this location, it means one of those is not correct. So this is an fail, or this is a failed login attempt. Okay, so what we need to do now, number one, we have to read the value of the counter from the ViewState. Number two, once we read the value, then we have to increment the value so that we count the number of incorrect attempts. Number three, for the next time, we have to save the new value of the counter in the ViewState, again in the ViewState, so that the next time we enter wrong username and password, we have the updated value of the counter. Once we do so, we read, we increment, and we save the new value back to our ViewState object. we have to do the checking. So check for or check the counter. So for example, if the user enters 3 times wrong username and password, we will lock the account. Okay, so here in the page load, we created the view state and we stored a value in it. Now we need to read the view state. So a good practice when reading an object is always checking if it's null or not, because if it's null and you try to read it, then your application will crash. So what we can do is the following: if view state, remember we have the view state, and you give exactly the name you gave here. So Control C, Control V, does not equal null. So if it's not equal to null, then we can go ahead and read. Otherwise, maybe we can display an error. And actually, all of this should be done only if the view state object is not null. So how do we read the view state? What we are storing in the view state, okay, if you look here, this is a state bag, and this, the view state, is storing a string, a key string, and this value is treated as a string. So what we need to do, we need to increment this value, and in order to increment this value, we have to change its data type to an integer. So we declare a counter equal, we can either do convert to int. Okay, and now we need to read the value from the view state. So to read the value, you can simply call this one. Alright, so now we have the value. Number 2, we need to increment the value, so simply counter plus plus. Number 3, we have to save the value back to the view state so that the next time we check, we have the updated value. Again, in order to store back, it's exactly the same as when we created it. So instead of 0, now we have to give the new value of our counter. So if it was 0 the first time, then now the value should be, after incrementation, it should be 1. Now we need to check the counter. So we said, for example, we need to check if the user tried 3 times. So if our counter is, we can say, either equals to 3, so we wait until the user tries it 3 times, or you can say greater than or equal to 3. Both are accepted here. So what should happen now? We will simply display an error message that the account has been locked, and we will deactivate the login button so that the user cannot try again. So deactivate or disable login button, and this we can do by calling the enabled and setting enabled property and set it to false. So the button is login btn.enabled equal false. So this way the user cannot click on the button again. And finally we can display a message. So message label dot text equals account locked, please contact admin. Okay, so let's go again and check what we have done. So we are looking for the event where the user enters one of these two, or enters a wrong value for one of these two, either one. So before we read the value, we said it's a good practice to check if it's null or not. If it's not null, then we can read it, change it to integer, and store it in a local variable counter. Then we increment the counter, and for the next time we store it back again in that view state. So as if we are saying we are updating the view state here, the value of that view state object. And finally we check. If the user tries 3 or more times, then we disable the button and we display a message. And of course we need the semicolon. Okay, so here in ideal situations we redirect the user to a home page. We don't have a home page at the moment, but if you remember last time we had this default page, so we can practice redirecting the user to that page. So our page that we want the user to go to after this login is the login page. So what you can do is you can say response.redirect and you give the name of your page. So this is the default.aspx. Okay, so let's run and check. So Control F5. So this is our login page, admin, and if you click on login, so we will be redirected to this new page. Okay, so let's try to go back. So login. Now we want to check for the other case. So we want to enter wrong username and password. So AD for example. This is 1, this is 2, and this is 3. So now after 3 times I will get this message and the button will be disabled. So without the use of ViewState there is no way to remember after every click what was there in that page or the state of that page. There was no way to remember what or how many times we have clicked on the button. So with the help of the ViewState object we were able to store the value and retrieve it after every post back from the server. Okay, what I forgot to tell you is since now we have 2 pages, so we need to ask the program to start with the login page. Now the default in Microsoft Visual Studio 2017 is that the debugger will start with whichever page you are in at the moment. So now because I'm in the login page, so the login page will be loaded. If I go to the default page and start, then the default page will be loaded. So we need to change this. To change this behavior you need to go to Solution, Explorer, and then right click on your project and go to Properties of your project. Here you can change all the properties of the project, and the one we need now is the web. So, and in particular the start action. As you can see by default it's the current page, which means in whichever page you are, then this will be the one loaded. We need to go to a specific page, and then here you can specify which page to start with, and this is usually the login page. Okay, so we're done for now. As you can see, we set the start page, we used the ViewState and the login page, so now you can go ahead and try your own. Think of any scenario you would like to use the ViewState in, and I'll be seeing you in another video, and we will be talking about cookies, which is another option for state management. See you soon.